In this video, I'm showing you the easiest and fastest way to build and monetize a full stack application from completely scratch. We're going to be coding up a completely custom application using React, and we're going to implement authentication as well as payment processing to create a subscription-based software application. I'll also show you how to come up with a great idea that has the highest probability of actually making you money, as well as a full tutorial on how to build up all of the infrastructure that is required in order to actually charge money and make this into a money-making application. Before we get into the code, it's important to talk about how to come up with a great idea for your software. Now, there are broadly two kinds of applications that you can build. We have B2C, so business to customer applications, and we have B2B, so business to business application. What this broadly means is that a business to customer application or a business is simply a business or a software that you sell directly to customers. Think of something like Netflix or Spotify, like you directly as an individual customer are buying that software because it is meant for actual people for us to use. Whereas a business to business is a kind of business or a software that you target to businesses. A big example of this is, for example, Stripe, which allows businesses to charge money. Now, whether you're building a business to consumer or a business to business software, the right idea should ideally solve a problem. That is the basic requirement of any business. You need to be solving some kind of problem for someone. And number two, it needs to be simple enough where you could release some kind of an MVP, so like a very simple version of that project quite quickly so that you can start seeing whether your target customers actually want to use it. And number three, it should be easy and simple to use. It shouldn't be something that's super complicated, because especially for a new software, people or businesses are just not going to be willing to spend the time to figure out how to use it if it's just super complicated to start using and super complicated to start seeing the value. What I'm going to be showing you in this video is how I'm going to personally monetize this particular application right here that is meant for digital nomads to essentially allow them to compare the cost of living in different countries. And rather than focusing on the specific code of that application, because actually it's your job to find the right idea, something that people actually want, something that solves a problem that you can build. But rather, what I'm going to focus on in this video is how I'm going to build the infrastructure around this project to actually handle authentication. So essentially signing up users, like knowing which users have bought the subscription for my software and which have not, as well as the infrastructure to actually charge money from customers securely and easily. And for that, we're going to be using Wix Studio, who are the paid sponsor of this video. Now let's get into the actual code. So when you're monetizing any kind of application, you're going to need to implement authentication to essentially manage the users of your software, as well as payment processing. So how do you actually charge customers for money? Now, this can be very tricky to implement on your own. And of course, there's many options out there that you can use for this, but most of these are going to require so many different pieces. You're going to need to have payment processing with this provider, and then you're going to need to have a server with a database and all these kind of things. But for this project, we're going to be using Wix Studio, which is a web creation platform. And many people think Wix is just like a website builder, and they do have that as well. But as programmers, this is not actually what we're interested in. What we're interested in is Wix Studio, which is their end-to-end platform for developers, designers, and marketers to give you everything you need to develop and ship web applications extremely quickly and easily. What we're going to be working is the Wix headless infrastructure, which essentially includes a couple of APIs for things like e-commerce, events, bookings, and specifically what we're going to be using, the pricing plans, which allows us to essentially use Wix's infrastructure, implement payment plans with Wix's pre-built payment processing to allow us to charge money from our customers for our application. And what makes me super excited about this is that if you follow along with this video, or you can just get all of this code down below in the description, you can use all of this as essentially a template that you can then use for any application in the future that you're going to want to monetize. Because now that you have built up all of this architecture once, by just swapping out a couple of project keys and things like this, you can use this same code to then monetize any application you want to monetize in the future, rather than having to build up all of this infrastructure from scratch every single time. Now, to get started, you can head out to wix.com/studio/developers/headless. This is where you're going to be getting access to these headless features of Wix Studio that we're specifically going to be using as developers. Now we're going to click on Get Started, and we're going to make an account with Wix. Once you do that, what you're going to also do is go into this URL right here, which I'll put on the screen, where you can actually get access to a couple of ready-made templates for all of these different APIs that they give you. Like for example, if you want to make an application where you have call bookings, then you can just use their template right here. Or for e-commerce, you can use their template as well. And for these pricing plans, which we're going to be implementing today, you can also use their template, or you can code this up yourself by looking at the documentation, or use my template, which we're going to be making in this video, for which you can get the code down below in the description. To start with, we're going to create a new folder inside of our file system that's going to house our React application. So we're going to create a new folder, and then you're going to open up that folder using your code editor of choice. Me personally, these days I use a code editor called Cursor AI. I made a previous video on this code editor and exactly why I use it, but I like it because it gives me this AI chat window on the right that basically allows me to use AI very efficiently when building this application. Then what I'm going to do is open up my terminal, and then we're going to call npx create React app and give a name to our application. And what this is going to do is give you a skeleton for a React project. If you've done this before, then you'll obviously know this already. And what we will do straight away is go into app.js, which is where our application is going to exist. And this is where you would paste or build the business logic of your actual application. So what your app actually does. This is where most of your coding time would be spent. In this video, we'll just focus on building the infrastructure around this. So what we'll go is to index.js, which is the level above app.js. And this is where we're going to be able to implement a couple of checks to make sure that the user is logged in or sign up. And if so, we're going to be implementing how to check whether the user has subscribed, which is going to determine whether we're going to show app to them or whether we're going to show some kind of page to tell them to subscribe before they can access your application. So to start doing that, what we're going to go to is this quick start right here on Wix Studio, which is going to basically explain how to get started with everything. We're going to copy these commands from here and run them to install the required Wix packages to implement, first of all, the payment processing, so the pricing plans features. And then we're going to also make sure that we have installed these packages over here. And while that is installing, we're going to go back to our code files and create a new component called subscriptions.js, which is going to be the page where the user is going to be able to subscribe and pay for your application. And over here, we're going to first of all copy these lines over here to import everything that is required. And looks like those packages are installed. So we're going to next install these ones, React and JS-cookie. And again, while that is happening, we're going to go in here again, and you can just go to the link below to find all these code files. What we're going to do is copy this part as well. And we're actually not going to copy it over here. We're going to create a new file called Wix context. I'm going to explain in a second why we're doing it this way. And over here is where this Wix client is going to be created. Now, the Wix client is essentially the client that is going to allow us to communicate to the Wix backend, which we're going to configure in just a second. Now over here again, we're going to make a couple of imports. We're going to import everything we need for React, as well as create client and auth strategy from Wix/SDK, plans and orders from Wix/pricing plans, redirects from Wix/redirects, as well as members from Wix/members, which is another package that we will actually have to install by calling npm install Wix members. Don't worry, all of this is going to make sense in a second. We're going to also copy these members and add these modules in here inside of this client that we're creating. These are basically the Wix modules that we're telling the client to give us access to. And then down here, we're going to export function Wix client provider. It's going to take children, and we're going to return something like this. My ID is just giving it to me directly. And then what we're going to do is inside of index.js, we're just going to wrap everything around Wix client provider. That essentially just gives us access to this Wix client that we're creating inside of this context to all of the applications below it inside of our application. Now, before we move forward, what we need to do is back over here and go through a couple of these steps right here. So we need to, first of all, create a project inside of our Wix Studio backend, which we're going to do by clicking over there. So we're going to open this on a new tab, create new headless project. And here we're going to choose whatever, work, personal, doesn't really matter. I am a developer. So here's going to ask us which Wix headless features we're actually going to want to use for our purposes. We're using pricing plans. Depending on what you're building, you might want to look at these other ones. They're also very useful, but we're just going to select that one and we'll just call this nomad cost because this is what we're going to be monetizing in this video. And that is going to take me to my Wix dashboard where we're again going to need to do a couple of things. So we're going to go back to our quick start guide and look at what is our next step. Next, we're going to set up authorization for my site by creating and configuring an auth app. So we're again just going to open this link right here and follow the instructions. So we're going to go over here to our dashboard. We're going to go to settings. Then we're going to go to headless settings. And over here, we can create a new client. Now, this is essentially what's going to allow us to authenticate using our frontend and connect to this Wix Studio backend. So we're going to call this nomad cost. We're going to create this right here. And then what it's going to give us is this client ID over here, which I'm going to copy. And I'm going to go back to my code, to my Wix context, and copy in place of this client ID over here. And then I'm just going to copy paste a couple of URLs to these allowed redirect domains, as well as this allowed authorization redirect domains to essentially make sure that everything is going to work. I'm going to put localhost callback, localhost login, and over here again, localhost callback as well. And I'm going to click save. And then we're going to go back to our instructions. And step number 3, we're going to set a domain. So we just actually did that. And we also did step number 4 by copy pasting those URLs. By the way, once you actually publish this and you put this app on the internet, you're just going to go in here and in place of localhost, you're just going to put the domain of your application in those fields. And now what we can do is go ahead and copy paste all of this code into our subscription to create our subscriptions component. And because we were doing this slightly differently, as in we created this Wix client over here, we're just going to import that from this Wix context right here by going import Wix client context from Wix context like that. And what I forgot to do is on this line right here, we're just going to export default Wix client context. And what this is going to allow us to do is get access to this Wix client by simply creating it as a variable, just like that. Wix client equals to use context Wix client context. Now, what is going to happen is that this right here is going to create this Wix client, which we've connected to our application using this client ID, which we got from our Wix Studio backend. And then we've told which modules we want to get access to using this client. And now this client, porting over here as this variable, gives us access to all this functionality using Wix Studio. And just to show this, I'm actually going to run this application. And before I do that, I'm just going to, instead of this app, I'm just going to put subscriptions over here and run npm start. And before I do that, I obviously need to cd into my folder and run npm start again. And we'll see if we forgot anything or if this works. And looks like it doesn't work because Wix client provider is not defined. Let's see where we made this mistake. And of course we have to first of all import Wix client provider as well as subscriptions right there. And now it should work. Wix client context not found in blah, 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 blah. And there's one line which we forgot to place here, which is Wix client context equals create context. And by the way, I might be going quickly in this video. You can just pause the video at any moment to write out the code or anything like that. Also have to import all of our React functionality. So we'll add that and remove that. And we'll remove these styles because I do remember that they didn't actually work. And we'll remove those braces and still doesn't work. Cookies is not defined. And we'll comment that line for now. And finally, we have fixed all of the mistakes and we see this window over here. Now, the reason why no plans are actually rendering is because we haven't actually defined any plans for our application in the Wix Studio backend. So we need to go back to our dashboard. We're going to head back and we're going to go to pricing plans over on the left-hand side. And this is where we can start creating our pricing plans with the different prices and things like that. So we're going to click here on create plan. I'm going to give it a name, for example, just Nomad Plus or whatever. And then we're going to define the price right here. You would probably put it as reoccurring payment. And you're going to define the price, whatever you want. Just for these test purposes, I'm going to set it as free so that I can properly test this to make sure that it works. So I'm going to set length until canceled, just like that. And you can check out a couple of these other settings down here. But we're just going to click on save. And then we're going to set up payment method. So here you would connect it to Stripe or whatever payment provider you want. I'm just going to connect it to my Stripe account right here. So you would need to create a Stripe account for yourself or your business, and you can connect PayPal or whatever payment provider you want. But now that is connected. And if we go ahead and we refresh, we'll see if it shows up just like that. Nomad Plus, our payment plan, is showing up inside of our application. Now we actually want to make this look a bit better. So I'm actually just going to tell AI, please make this look better, include a checkout button, and we'll see what we get from our ChatGPT over here. So it looks like we get this. I'm just going to click apply and accept. And once we refresh, well, it looks a bit better. I guess we can fiddle around with the styles later if you want. So now if you go ahead and you click on checkout, it should open up this Wix managed checkout flow right here. But I can just sign up and do that, but we'll actually not do that yet, because first we want to implement authentication. So before we even see this page, we want the user to create an account, and then once the account is created, our application should check first whether that user is already subscribed, so whether they have a subscription to the application, and if they do, it should load up the application logic, which you would code up separately, and if not, it should show this page right here. So to do that, Wix actually gives us access to a module called members, for which we can find the documentation right here by going to visitors and members and handle members with Wix managed login. Again, URL will be listed on the screen. And over here, we can start creating our login auth flow. And to do that, we're first of all going to create a new React component called login.js. We're going to add a few imports, and then we're going to export default function login. We're going to get our Wix client using the same lines as before. We're going to create a dummy function handle login, which is going to handle all of our login functionality. We'll not implement that just yet. And then at the end, we're simply returning a button that is going to call this handle login function, which we're going to implement using Wix in a second. And that is going to be our component. Now, again, you can just follow along this tutorial that Wix have conveniently made for you, or you can copy down the code down below, but it's good to go through this at least once so you understand what is happening. Everything starts with this code right here. We're going to need to get something called login request data by calling my Wix client, which is, remember, the Wix client that we just created before, .auth.generate OAuth data. Now, instead of having these test URLs in here, what we're going to put over here is something like this, which we're going to use as backticks to allow us to insert variables into this string. It's going to be window.location.origin, which is basically just going to get the URL where you are right now. And then for this callback, we're going to paste the same right here on top of this dummy mywebsite.com right here. So what this is going to do is this generate OAuth data needs to take a login URL, which is the exact URL where you are going to be logging into this application from, as well as what's called a callback URL. So a URL where this is going to send us right after the login flow is completed. And then we're going to follow along with the tutorial. So this login request data is going to look something like this. Don't worry, you don't need to fully understand this. It's just something you need to do this properly. Then what we're going to do is call something like this. We're going to get what's called a auth URL by calling my Wix client .auth.getAuth URL with this login request data that we just got before. Before that, I actually want to do something like this. I'm going to call local storage.setItem, where I'm going to set an item in the local storage inside of the user's browser that's going to store this login request data, because the way I want to do this, I actually need this to be stored in the local storage. You'll see in a second why that is. And after this is done, so we put this login request data into the local storage, we're going to now open up this auth URL, which is the URL generated by Wix, where this auth flow is essentially going to happen. And I'm going to put window.location.href into this auth URL, which basically just sends the user to this auth URL. And I'm going to also put all of these inside of a try except block to catch any errors, just like that. And before we move forward, what I want to do inside of index.js is conditionally load these different components. So basically what I'm going to do is create a component right here called, let's say, wrapper. And what this is going to do is, first of all, again, we're going to import our Wix client from the context. And then we're going to set up some state, which is going to keep track of whether the user is authenticated or not, just like that. And then we're going to have a use effect, which is basically a function in React that calls every time some state changes, which we basically just want to call every time this application is loaded. It's going to include a function. There's an async function called check authentication, and we'll implement this later. But for now, basically what I'm just going to do is set is authenticated to be false, and we'll implement this properly later. And we're going to set it to call whenever Wix client changes. And then inside of this wrapper component, what I want to do is check something like this. So what this is going to check is if is authenticated is true, then it's going to load up subscriptions. If it is false, it is going to load login. And instead of just rendering subscriptions, I'm just going to render this wrapper component right here. And we see some errors. Let's see what they are. Use context, blah, 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 not defined. So just need to import them right there. I'm going to import that as well. Login is not defined because we haven't actually imported login, I guess. Import login from login. And this should be Wix context, right? Okay, there we go. Now, because this state over here is authenticated as false, we are rendering login right here. Call that right there. Okay, so if we're setting this as true, it's going to load up subscriptions, false, the other one. Now let's continue with our login flow. So what is going to happen is once this happens, when someone clicks login, I'm just going to set that as false for now. It is going to send us to this login URL, just like that. For now, it's not going to work because you haven't actually finished this. But over here, we would complete the login flow using this Wix managed login. So you don't actually have to build all of this yourself. But after that happens, what it's going to do is send you to this callback URL, which we defined right there. So now to finish this off, we're going to need to actually define what happens when you go into this callback URL. So we're going to go back over here and follow this login callback tutorial over here. So for this over here, what we're going to do is create a new component called callback.js, and it's going to include this required logic. Over here, again, we are importing a few things. We are exporting default function callback. We are getting the Wix client as always. And then we're going to start with a use effect, which is going to call every time this is loaded, which we're going to set to happen whenever the URL is equal to this callback URL, which we're going to be sent to. And so we'll actually just do that right here. Instead of this, we'll actually do checking something using something like this. So we'll go if URL is equal to callback, then it's going to render this callback, which we're going to have to remember to import because I always forget to do that. And if not, it is going to check whether the user is authenticated. If not, it's going to load login. If so, it's going to load up subscriptions for now right there. So inside of this callback, before we implement this, if we are on this URL, we're just going to return in terms of the front end, something like loading or callback. I'm just going to call loading just like this. It should only show up for like a couple of seconds, but the main thing that is happening is inside of this use effect in here, we're going to create an async function called handle callback, which is going to include the following logic. Returned OAuth data from wixline.auth.parse from URL. And I'm also going to want to get OAuth data from the local storage where we just stored it inside of the login component by calling json.parse local storage.getItem login request data. Is that correct or is that a different name? Yes, it is the correct name over there. Then what we'll just do is include this error handling over there. And after that, what we're going to need to do to get is something called member tokens, which we'll get from wixclient.auth.getMemberTokens. We'll paste that over there. And then we will call wixclient.auth.setTokens to be these member tokens that we just got. And what we will also do is set this as a cookie using cookies.set. So we'll set a session cookie to be equal to these member tokens. And finally, we will actually go back away from this callback URL back to the main /URL. So the home of this application. And then finally, we will just call this function right there. So that is a lot. I know you don't fully need to understand this. This is just the steps that need to happen to properly authenticate someone using Wix Studio. So we're getting these member tokens, essentially using these details, and then using this Wix client, which should just be Wix client, not Wix client context. And that should be not a capital W. We're setting tokens. So we're setting that these auth tokens that we got from the Wix client are essentially now the tokens of the authenticated user. So this is how we're going to know who is the current authenticated user using our application. Now we'll see if we missed anything over here. Looks like we did everything just like that. So we'll see if this works. It's highly possible I missed something here. And of course we can't resolve Wix client context because that always happens. Because it should be like that. Wix client is not defined. That should be my Wix client and not Wix client. URL is not defined. And of course, for this to work, we actually need to first get this URL before we define it, which we get using window.location.pathname. This is how you get the URL that you're currently in. And now everything is going to load. So we're going to click on login, and that is going to open up this auth flow over here. Then if you don't have an account, you're just going to sign up right there. We're going to sign up using email, not a robot. We're going to sign up, see if this works. Loading, and just like that, it looks like it all went through. Now, of course, we still just were sent back to our login because we didn't actually implement the proper checks on how to check whether someone is authenticated. So we'll just do that right there. So we'll go back to index.js. And remember when we saved these tokens in this cookie right here? Well, this cookie, which we'll actually find from our Google Chrome console right here by going to application, and then we should see this session cookie right here. And this is going to include the tokens where we're storing essentially the login tokens of this user. So this is how we're going to check whether someone is logged into our application or not. So over here in this get authentication function, what I'm going to go and do is set session to be equal to cookies.get session. So this is going to get that session cookie from our browser's cookies. And then if this session cookie exists, we are going to just parse it by going tokens equal to json.parse session, because we just need to do that to parse it properly to be used in our code. Then we're going to call Wix client.auth.set tokens to essentially tell our Wix client that, hey, these are the tokens of the currently logged in user. So now our Wix client is going to know which user is logged into our application. And then we're just going to check if tokens.refresh token exists and if the tokens.refresh token has the role of member. Now this is important because by default what this will do is if the user is not authenticated, you will still have these tokens in the Wix client, but it will just have a role of a visitor. So to make sure that we're actually dealing with a logged in member, we're going to check for this role of member. That is how we know that someone is authenticated. And if that is true, we're going to set is authenticated to be true. And if that is not true, we're going to set is authenticated to be false. And also if this session cookie doesn't exist at all, we're also going to need to, with that case, so in that case as well, we'll also just put else is authenticated is equal to false. So we need one more brace like that. Now it should work. And of course, I'm also just going to put all of this in a try block just for some error handling. And in case there is some error, we're just going to console log the error in this cache block, just like that. It looks like there is some kind of error. Cookies is not defined. It's probably again because we have not properly imported this like that. In body of module, at the top, like that. So as you can see, now it actually loaded up our subscriptions page, which suggests that our login worked properly. Our Wix client essentially knows that we're now logged into our application. So just to recap what is happening here. When we are in index.js, this function will check whether the session cookie exists and whether that session cookie has the role of a member, which will suggest that the login flow has been completed and that token has been stored in the cookies. If that is not the case, it's going to load the login component. Well, by clicking the login button, it is going to call this function and complete the login flow using Wix Studio, using our Wix Studio backend, which all happens automatically behind the scenes. And as part of it, in this callback function over here, it's going to store those login tokens inside of the cookie, so that then again, when this check happens over here, is authenticated, is going to come back as true. So the state is going to be set as true, which means that we're going to load the subscriptions page over here. Now we're almost done here because it is not actually enough to check whether the user is logged in. We also need to check whether they have purchased a plan. Now, luckily, because we've already built all of this infrastructure to log in the user, connected to our Wix backend, everything like this last step is actually very, very easy. I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. So we're going to go back once again to our index.js. And first of all, we're going to create again a new file that is going to sit again in between index and subscriptions. It's going to call it application wrapper or whatever you want to call it. Over here, we're going to basically implement a check for whether the user has an active subscription or not. And based on that, we're either going to load these subscriptions or some application component that is finally then going to contain the actual business logic of your application, which you're going to have, for example, over here in this app.js. So once again, we're first going to do some imports. You can just copy those right there. Then we're going to create a function application wrapper, and we'll just let AI complete that for us. And over here, what we're going to have is some kind of state that is going to simply track whether the user has an active order, which we're going to call has active subscription, just like that. AI just understood exactly what we want to do. And then we're going to have some kind of use effect that is going to check from the Wix client whether that user whose tokens are set as the active user on the Wix client has an active subscription. And this is wrong. We'll find this from the Wix docs in a second. And then we're going to have some conditional check over here where we're going to check if has subscription. In that case, we're going to return component, which we're going to have to remember to import just like that. And if not, so else, we're simply going to return subscriptions to take the user to the subscriptions window to subscribe for our app. And this one can be removed right there. And over here is where the magic is going to happen. So if you go to the Wix Studio JavaScript SDK documentation, you can find over here on backend modules, the thing that we're looking for, which is pricing plans. And there are two sort of sub modules of this pricing plans module. We have orders and we have plans. Now inside of orders, we have a method called member list orders. Now what this is going to do is for the authenticated user inside of the Wix client, what it is going to call is this function called orders.memberListOrders, which is going to check whether that member has an active order. So we're going to copy that right there. Await Wix client orders.memberListOrders, and we're going to save that as a res for response like that. And we're going to need to rename that slightly because we had called it Wix client. So just like that, we're going to call it with an empty object. There's some options that you could include if you wanted to like filter these somehow. And what the response from this method is going to look like is something like this, where we have an orders array as well as some other metadata. So to get the information that we are looking for, we're going to say orders equal to res.orders. And then what we're going to do is set const has subscription to be equal to orders 0.status equal to active, just like that. Because what this orders is going to look like is something like this, which is going to be an array of these kinds of objects where we have a property called status, which is going to be a couple of these options. So we have either active or ended or canceled or whatever. The one we're looking for is this active subscription to check if your subscription is active, as in it hasn't been canceled, things like this. So that is what we're checking for. Now, in reality, you probably wouldn't just check the first item of this list. You would have some kind of a check to go through all of the orders and check if any of them are active or something like that. Just to keep this simple for this example, we're assuming they can only have one order, so one member in this orders array. So we'll check it just like that. And then we will set has active subscription to be the value of this. So what this is going to check is if this is true. So if the order is active, this variable is going to be the Boolean value of true. And if it is false, then this is going to be the Boolean value of false. So that is going to be set over here inside of this state. And you might want to include error handling here and things like that. But for simplicity, we'll just leave it like that. We'll call the function right there. We'll set that to run whenever Wix client changes. And we'll see if we messed up in any way. So we don't have a subscription yet because we obviously haven't subscribed. So we'll click this checkout over here, which is going to take us to the Wix managed checkout flow. And now as we can see, we can already see our email here because we are logged in to our application using the Wix client. And then I can just click this get plan because remember, we just made this free for these example purposes. I'm going to click get plan and we're going to get this Wix managed thank you page. It's going to process the order. And once it goes through, we can check, got it. And it looks like it still took us to this subscription. So something did probably go wrong. We can go to sales and subscriptions, and we can see right here that we now have one member with an active subscription, just like that. I want to see exactly why this did not send us to the right window. And of course, it's because we are not even rendering this application wrapper at all. So of course we have to do that. So let us go back to index.js into this wrapper component. So this wrapper component is being rendered, and over here, instead of subscriptions, we just want to render application wrapper just like that. And looks like something went wrong and it's not defined, obviously, because story of my life, I forgot to import it. So now that we import it, things are going very, very wrong. Member list orders, blah, 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 undefined, undefined, undefined. Oh, it looks like we forgot to give our Wix client access to this orders module that is required over here. We have to import it, copy paste, just like that. And now, would you look at that? Everything is loading properly. We can see on our Google Chrome console that we got the orders from the Wix backend, where we can see all the details. You can see the plan ID. Now you would use all of this information to implement any kind of more complex, like loading, things like this, whatever you want to do with it. And as we can see, we have status of active. Now, just to show you what would happen if we cancel the plan. So let's say the plan expires or something like that, and you would need to like set up a window for them to access the subscription, and you would go through and look at the Wix headless documentation to see exactly how to do that, what methods to call. But just to show you an example, if I go ahead and manually cancel the subscription over here, so we'll go ahead and view, and we will go manage subscription and cancel subscription. So now the subscription is no longer active. Once we go back to our application and we refresh, it is now going to again send us to this choose plan window over here, because the subscription, while it came back, it is no longer active. And again, we can see that by finding it over here. So we can see status canceled. So that is how all of that works. So now what would you do next? What you would do is forget about all of this pretty much and simply go to app.js and start building out your actual application. So I would actually go ahead and copy my code that I've coded before from actual business logic for this Nomad course application, paste it there, and focus all my time on making the application as good as possible now that the authentication and payment processing is all built using Wix Studio. And what's so cool about this is that you can now just use this as a template. Whenever in the future you want to monetize an application, you can have all the authentication and payment plans figured out automatically for you using these exact same logic. You just have to create a new application inside of Wix Studio, change out the client ID. Now, again, if you want to get access to all this code, it's going to be linked down below in the description. You don't even need to fully understand all of these. I just wanted to go through all of it so you actually know how this auth flow is happening, how everything is working. I hope you found this helpful. Thank you again for Wix Studio for sponsoring this video. And with that said, obviously, what you're now going to need is the right idea for an application to monetize. Just because you built the infrastructure to accept payments doesn't mean that someone's going to pay for it if you don't have the right business idea. But I actually made a full separate video on what I think are the top 5 business ideas for programmers in 2025 and 2024. So if you're still looking for ideas, I would highly recommend you watch this video right here and implement one of those ideas, then connect it to this infrastructure, and boom, you might just be making your first dollars with coding. So with that, go watch this video and I'll see you next time.